Monday, 27 November, year of our Lord 2023. Welcome for the second hour, the early evening edition of the War. I want to go immediately to Rome. I haven't had a lot of polls today. The reason we've got so much news backed up over the weekend, I want to get the personalities, the reporters, all of it up, get the information out. We'll have more polls probably tomorrow. Ben Harnwell joins us from Rome. Ben, the first piece, I know we got a number of things to go through on the international situation, particularly relates to particularly as it relates to Ukraine. But I gotta start with, and I'm not trying to gloat here, but we want to start with this piece that was in the Times of London, I think on Thursday or Friday of last week. I put it up on Getter with the help of the staff, I think yesterday. It is about this, and I think it came from it was the Times of London was doing some of its own reporting, but also summarizing what was it Bild? BILD, the German newspaper, about the Germans and the Americans, which are the two leading proponents of the Ukraine war, are in, and I don't even know if there's negotiations or discussions, is basically telling the Ukrainians, this thing's over. We got to prepare to get the best deal possible. Am I being too harsh in my assessment of these pieces in the German papers and in the Times of London?
No, not at all, Steve. And good evening to you. And happy birthday. The article here in the Times has the headline "U.S. and Germany," and it carries the quote. It's in quote marks: "Pressing Kiev to end war in Ukraine." And this is an article here that immediately caught my eye. Obviously, for obvious reasons, right? Because we have been talking about this eventuality for the last 18 months. The problem with this article, Steve, and actually appreciate your interpretation of this, that quote, pressing Kiev to end war in Ukraine, it doesn't appear anywhere in the article. What they have is an unsourced attribution saying that Germany and the US are talking about how to apply pressure on Zelensky to have a ceasefire with Russia. But there's very little breakdown of that. And the argumentation in the article confuses me somewhat, because if the United States and Germany had wanted to apply that pressure on Ukraine, the time to have done that, because here the article is suggesting it's now really necessary for Ukraine in order to have a ceasefire along present territorial boundaries. The time for Ukraine to have done that from its position of maximal strength was before the counter-offensive. Then it could have had some leverage with Russia. Right now, there aren't. We're going to come on to this. There's another article that I'm going to mention in a little while that says that they're using sort of machine guns now from World War One. We'll go into that in a moment, but the point is that their military capabilities are really being ground down. Vladimir Putin has his own domestic political pressures in Russia. He has, you often hear peeps of this, but from the mainstream media, but they don't go into it too much. He has a lot of, he's to some extent not a moderate, but he has a right flank that he has to appease and keep on side, and a very strong nationalist flank. And really, Russia has sacrificed a lot in this war from the Russian perspective. And there's really very little interest now in Russia in accepting a ceasefire terms dictated by the United States and Zelensky, when everybody knows the game is up as far as Ukraine is concerned. So this is a confusing article for me, and I don't quite understand.
I think here's the way I would interpret it when it came out. Clearly, from a war perspective, you had better leverage early on, but they never thought that the American people. This is driven by the fact that the Ukraine supplemental is dead in the water. It would have to be attached to something on the border, which there's not enough there, and the Democrats are going to oppose it. So just an independent at the $60 billion level. We're adamant it cannot be one penny into the money laundering operation. But the Americans see the demise of this, and I think that this is, since the Times of London, along with the Guardian, I think have done two of the best reporting as, I don't want to say fake news, but at least they've had people there constantly. They're a renowned masthead in Europe. I think this was sending a message to Zelensky that, hey, your two partners are having the discussions of how they're going to put maximum pressure on you. And if you don't go down this route, you ought to read the biography of President Diem. I think it's after the CIA's meeting there last week. They know in Capitol Hill, particularly with the financial firestorm we've got going on and this huge budget fight coming on where we don't have enough money. Obviously, we're $2 trillion every year in deficits. We don't have the ability to pay for that. The funding for the Ukraine's done. And instead of, waiting, they want to get ahead of it. I think the first thing ahead of it, they have to convince Zelensky that they mean this. And the way to do it is to leak it in some of the major press. But give us some of the articles, other things that are coming up about recruiting, about materiel, about the rift between Zelensky and his military leaders. Because, and I keep saying this, the military there is not going to take the rap, particularly as this thing winds down, from the Ukrainian people, of how did we lose 75,000 to 100,000 Ukrainians and not essentially pick up a square yard of the contested territories. I think the military is quite adamant, the way I read it, that they're not going to take the rap on this. They're going to say, hey, we reported to the politicians. This was Boris Johnson's idea. This was the Biden regime's idea. And Zelensky was their tool to do it. And they gave us the money and we took a shot, right? But we're not going to be left holding the bag of why this was just an abject failure. So walk through some of the other stuff, because I think it's more evident every day you're seeing this, sir.
Steve, there's a lot of positioning going on in the media right now, and the natural, ostensible audience for some of these articles, and you just sort of mentioned that the article in the Times of London was really sort of aimed at Zelensky and his partners in Ukraine. Here's an article which is absolutely not meant for Ukraine, but it's meant externally, and I guess it's trying to bolster Ukraine's position as things start to implode and talk of a ceasefire, which will probably be more of a surrender now than an actual tactical ceasefire. As those imperatives start to build, obviously Ukraine wants to go in that from the strongest negotiating position possible, which is a bit like playing poker. It's going to have a lot of bluff to it. And one of the aspects that they're going to try to present, this being at least from the Russian perspective, a war of attrition, is that they want to try and feign the ability to continue on holding the present lines. Now, so here's an article I think assists the argument that we're making, that not all of these articles are have an obvious audience. So here's an article which is ostensibly about something that's going on in Ukraine, but it's really meant for an international audience, primarily Russia and then to the West. And it is to do with conscription. Now, a lot of people have been trying to avoid, we know this, we've been talking about it for months, trying to avoid being called up for the meat grinder. So what they've done is they've pinned on the back of this the idea that with the change of defense secretaries a month ago, there's now going to have a softer approach to recruitment, and that is if you've been so far resisting your call-up papers or avoiding the press gangs, you can have a nice conversation with the recruitment office and say what you think your skills are, and that might not necessarily send you to the front line. You might be sort of operationally miles away doing something more warm and comfortable and less dangerous. I mean, it's clearly, whoever wrote this article never remembered that the old 80s hit TV show Private Benjamin with Goldie Hawn. Right? Once you sign up for military action, that's it, really. They're not going to invite them in for a warm cup of coffee. Well, okay, it's snowing, it's very sort of sub-zero. We can understand, old chap, you don't want to go to the front line here. Come over here and work in a canteen. That's not how it works, Steve. But the idea of this article is that there are further resources that have been untapped to do with sort of manpower, manning the front lines. That with a change of with a more genteel, a more avuncular approach, they're able to get huge swathes of young guys to come in and sign up and that will carry the Ukrainian war effort going on forward. Obviously, this is as I say, this is for a Western and a Russian audience to suggest, that Ukraine's sort of quite comfortable in the war, can carry on. Down on the ground, and we have been talking about this. It's a charnel house, it's a meat grinder, and the Ukrainians, those that have been avoiding the call-up, there were a lot of people who did, out of patriotism, who did sort of volunteer straight away in the first few months. But now the people who, after nearly 2 years, have resisted so far, they're not naive. They know very well what the conditions are like on the front line, and there's a reason that they don't want to go and be fed into that meat grinder, and that's the instinct, firstly for self-preservation, and also because they realise that sooner or later this war effort is going to end up in talks with Putin. And what we've been talking about here on the show, Steve, for some time, is that really what's carrying this war on is not so much an existential need for Ukraine anymore. It's an existential need for Biden's reputation. And young men on the ground in Ukraine, they have many strengths to them, but one of those strengths is not the fact that they want to go and die in order to carry Biden over the line in a year's time in November. So this article here, I'll post all the links. It's worth seeing at the subtle mind games that are being played on all sides. But let's be fair, on all sides, and sometimes the truth isn't exactly the way they're spinning it.
I want to talk about you've got one, and we'll put it up. We don't have time for it now, but the World War I equipment that's being used. But I want to talk about both the foreign policy piece about the unintended law of unintended consequences of seizing the assets, but also fascinating the Polish truck drivers, because we're seeing in Eastern Europe, whether I think it's Slovakia is the new populist guy there saying we're out. Of course, Hungary's taken a hard line. You've seen a much tougher hard line by the front-facing countries. Walk me through what's going on with the Polish truck drivers.
Yeah, this is I think, just an illustration now that Poland is moving. You can see the way things are going now. One of the reasons it took a certain hit that the largest party, the Law and Justice Party, whose prime minister is about to be re-signed in, President Duda argued that the constitutional precedence in Poland is that the president invites the leader of the largest party to form a government. What's unusual this time around is that his own party, Law and Justice, doesn't have an absolute majority, a governing majority, though it is the largest party. So the polls, one of the reasons it's speculated that the Law and Justice didn't do as well in the elections was because it had been attacking a very it had been a very loyal ally of the United States, let's put it like that, in this war, and a lot of polls are slightly more ambivalent through long experience of punching its largest neighbour repeatedly in the nose. So I think what Poland's now trying to do is sort of re-equilibrate its position to one of more, let's call it a sort of Hungarian neutrality. And this article here about the Polish truckers just basically saying, and we have been mentioning this on the show, that the Polish agriculture, for example, has taken a huge hit over recent months because of the grain exports from Ukraine, and a lot of these areas that are important for the Polish economy are starting to suffer, and the political patience is running out, and understandably, the Poles are now starting to want to put Polish first rather than Ukrainians first. And of course, the Poles very generously accepted, I think, like over 1 million Ukrainian refugees, and still have them and are paying for that. But of course,
paying for it. It's causing a huge. I know EU and the United States are underwriting a bunch of that, but it's causing huge pain. The elites told us, and MSNBC told us every day in the first weeks of this war, that the economic warfare part was going to crush the Russian central bank, take all their currency, freeze all their assets internationally, freeze all their dollar reserves. They couldn't get that Putin and the oligarchs around him, who are definitely bad guys, that they would be out of business in 30 days. That didn't quite happen, did it, Ben?
It didn't quite happen. With hindsight, Steve, I wonder, how, whether our sociopathic overlords, whether this is just an example of this is how stupid they think you are, or whether really they are living perhaps on Jupiter, I don't know, perhaps on Venus. They're certainly not living on planet Earth. This article here in Foreign Policy, which is very important, along with Foreign Affairs, very important source of information that the foreign elites, that the foreign policy elites read. The first thing I would say about this article that is interesting is that it exists. Very different type of article from the ones that they were putting out a year or so ago, which was very gung-ho about the West basically commandeering Russian assets that had been held over in the West and Western banks, Western bank vaults. And the idea was let's just commandeer up to about $300 billion worth of assets, Russian assets, and we'll give it to Zelensky and the war effort. This is a very reasoned article. I'm just going to home in on the third point. Again, I will post the link to this. This is basically a structured argument of saying, that's probably not a good idea. With a bit of thought and analysis and consideration, it's probably not a great idea that we do commandeer these Russian assets. And it gives all the various reasons. One of the reasons, for example, Steve, is they suggest this might be a precedent that China might use against the West, which of course is absolutely true. The third point I'm going to mention here, because it sort of dovetails into, well, it doesn't dovetail, it actually sort of it replicates an argument you have been making repeatedly over on the show over the last 2 years, and that's this one here: seizing Russia's assets is unlikely to fuel de-dollarization efforts, and that's the argument here that you've been saying, that if we do this, if we force, forcing along with forcing Russia off the SWIFT banking system, all these things, all it will do is cohere the West's enemies into a stronger bloc with which to then sort of beat us around the head. And that, it talks about the Fed and the European Central Bank and the shift away from Western currencies. And that's, I think, finally the foreign policy establishment catching up with the line here that you've been pushing on the war for 2 years. But it's very important that they are catching up, finally.
What do you, Ben, we're going to have a firestorm between now and the end of the year. It's going to dawn on people that we've added another $1 trillion to our debt here in 100 days. That will start to dawn on them. We're having this huge budget fight that'll culminate in January and February. But this month, the elites in Washington are focused on the supplemental, and they're still pushing the $60 to $80 billion for Ukraine. And they've even done some gimmicks on the border, in the Senate, etc. What's your sense of how this fight, because I strongly believe with the war and posse put in the shoulder wheel, they will lose the fight over Ukraine spending. How would that play in the capitals of Europe?
I think it's increasingly being factored into the price. I think, to come back to the point that we're talking about Poland now, I think they're starting to realize now that the capitals across Europe, that America, between now and next November, when Trump returns to the White House, the landscape, the military landscape in Russia is not going to be in line with the Biden, Jake Sullivan axis, and it's ridiculous to tie it to bind your own national economy, your national security, your international relationships, and your neighborhood policies around a policy, a flagship policy in the United States, which is going to finish in failure. There is no way, for the reasons, Steve, that we pointed out pretty much 2 years ago. Whilst you can say, and I don't believe this, but there is an argument to suggest that the West had an interest in upholding the values of democracy and national borders and sovereignty of smaller states. As I say, I don't believe that argument, but it is an argument. Whilst it's possible to make that argument, it's impossible to say that the West had an existential interest in protecting Ukraine's borders and pushing NATO right up to Russia's border, whereas it was an existential interest for Russia. So whatever happened, whatever was going to happen over the last 2 years, it was always clear that being existential threat for Russia, Russia was going to throw everything into this in order to win. And now we're just seeing, after we know, I think the West fought far harder than anyone expected it to do so 2 years ago when Putin was planning its invasion. And in fact, we've caused ourselves massive political and economic damage in the West because of our support to Ukraine. But fundamentally, it was never existential to us in the way that it was existential to Russians' interest. And I think European capitals now, that they're factoring all this in, they realise that there's no more money that's coming from the United States. At some point, Ukraine's going to implode.
I think there's going to be shock. I think there's going to be shock therapy, because I believe we're going to get a hard no with no money. I think that's where this is going to culminate, particularly if we do our job. Ben, how do people follow you? Your engagement on social media makes me jealous. Where do people follow you?
Thanks, Steve. Well, there's warroom.org. If you want to subscribe to the War Room's daily exclusive newsletter, there you can go to Bannon's War Room on Rumble, which have great comments to them. But talking of great comments, the best comments of all time are on Getter. And therefore, I'm flattered and honoured, privileged to be posted by the best profile on Getter, which is at Steve Bannon. So if Steve is very kind when he reposts me. If you're not that patient and you want to see my posts straight away, rather than when Stephen K. Bannon gets round to reposting me, you can come to me directly on at Harnwell. But I am there on at Steve Bannon as well. Thanks very much, Steve.
Thank you, brother. So we're going to get back to, there's going to be shock therapy on this Ukraine situation, because the United States is broke and we can't afford another couple of $100 billion to Ukraine. This is one of the reasons you ought to go to birchgold.com right now /Bannon to get the End of the Dollar Empire, particularly focus on the third installment, which is the debt trap. Get the nomenclature, the process, procedures, all of it. Get up to speed. birchgold.com /Bannon. Go there today. Also, while you're there, ask the folks at Birch Gold, Philip Patrick and the team, why are the central banks of the BRICS nations buying gold at record rates in 22 and 23? And the Chinese Communist Party leading that, with 25% of the purchases being for them. Ask what they know that you don't. birchgold.com /Bannon. Mark Jeftovic, incredible piece, and you were honored to have it put up right away on Zero Hedge. Walk me through this. We're all going to have a carbon footprint allocation, and they're going to limit everything we do about that. Is this some apocalyptic thing is out of your head because you're always coming up with great ideas, or is this reality and people should start to focus on it?
Well, first off, thanks for having me and happy birthday. I've been positing for a long time that CBDCs would have, when they finally arrive, would be some kind of social credit mechanism. And it's not crazy stuff out of my mind. This is just what central banks and think tanks are saying in their own white papers. And
this is for our audience. This is central bank digital currencies, which the Fed. That's the other thing when I talk about Birch Gold. The BRICS are buying gold at record rates. The Fed is focused on a central bank digital currency. You think that is the way that they get into CCP type social credit score, total control of the population?
Absolutely. It's going to be the rails for UBI because they're demolishing the middle class. It's going to be the implementation mechanism for modern monetary theory. It'll be and it'll devolve into a social credit system. So the article that I wrote up on the weekend, I found this a think tank and a travel agency put out a report in early October saying that in the future, because of climate change, it was going to pose an existential threat to the travel industry because people were going to have their travel limited, restricted based on their carbon footprint. There would be an equivalent of a carbon passport that would limit how often you could travel in the future because of this climate, so-called climate crisis. And I always thought it was going to be natural that when this kind of thing happens, it's just going to normally fuse into this other track that is going along in parallel of the central bank digital currency. So the think tank was called the Future Labs Institute. The travel agency was called Intrepid Travel. It's put out by this LSN Global, which calls itself a trends intelligence organization, and they strike me as like a World Economic Forum wannabe, a mini-me to the WEF. And they are just speaking very matter-of-factly of this is going to happen. It'll happen by 2040. This is just sort of the direction things are going. And one of the other mega trends that they earmarked or spotted that they said will probably come along with this is a large societal embracement of socialism, neo-collectivism, they call it. And so they put out a whole other report on that, which I'm going to be putting out in the follow-up article to it. But basically, where we're headed in the future.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Mark, hang on for 1 second. We'll take a short commercial break. Mark Jeftovic about what the future holds if the Fed is successful on the central bank digital currency. Next in the War Room.
War Room Battleground with Stephen K. Bannon.
Okay, welcome back. We're talking about the central bank digital currency. This is the beginning of the end of the dollar empire, the de-dollarization by the BRICS nation, as Ben said last time. Look, I'm all for economic warfare, and I've been a big proponent of economic warfare against people like the Chinese Communist Party, but you can only use it one time. You can't. Otherwise, you're going to get people jiggy about the SWIFT system. They're going to get off. It's going to lead to de-dollarization, and you're going to be in the mess you're in now. But the central bank digital currency, I just want to hit rewind. I've only got so much time, Jeftovic, but this is very important. When you see think tanks and these groups putting out these papers, they're being commissioned by people that have the ability to act. And so what you're seeing is these are people that are thinking this through, and if they have their way, it's going to happen a lot sooner than 2040. So walk me through once again how they're going to get control, how the central bank digital currency is eventually going to lead to a social credit score and the control over you, including the fact that they can monitor your digital, your carbon footprint, so that, hey, maybe you only take a jet 2 or 3 times a year. The rest of the time you hoof it. Mark Jeftovic.
Yeah, well, right now we have this debt-based system which is unsustainable. I mean, some of the numbers you've been throwing out, we're racking up $1 trillion in debt in 100 days. Everybody knows, even in polite company, that the system is unsustainable. So central bank digital currencies will be seen as a way to extend the dollar system for another few decades. And what I think is going to happen is the idea of what we call money is going to change from these symbolic tokens backed by debt into a social credit score limited by your carbon footprint, personalized. That's what I think is the unspoken part behind all this. In a strange kind of way, they're almost sort of going back to the sound money playbook by saying, like, the debt really is backed by nothing, but now we're going to back it by carbon because we have this resource and climate crisis. It's that's going to be the attempt and the justification to get everybody else, I always say everybody else, not them, to ratchet down their lifestyles. And if you look at the numbers they're putting out, they're calling for on order of an 85% reduction in standard of living in Western nations like Canada, the U.S., Australia, England, because they're going to try and measure it because these
lifestyles as currently exist are too wasteful, too harmful to the environment, causing all types of issues with the third world, the developing world right now. So this is a new form of neocolonialism, and you've got to contract your lifestyle in order to be a good world citizen. Is that essentially their case?
What they're going to try and tell the story they're going to try and tell is there's a climate crisis, so we all have to rein in our consumption. What there really is a debt crisis, and I've always said debt is future value pulled into the present. So there is so much debt. The crisis isn't the climate, the crisis is the debt. And so now everybody has to take a haircut to pay off the debt of the previous generations and the current generations and the entitlement programs and the politicians spending beyond their means. That's the crisis. And you see it in the graph of the debt and what's going on with bonds and the $1 trillion every 100 days. There's the crisis. And no one is going to just take a haircut on that kind of money. So everyone has to take a haircut based on their carbon emissions. That's how they're going to try and spin this.
That's okay. I want to go. I don't have time to go through the day. I know you haven't put it up and Zero Hedge hasn't linked to it. But I want to go back to the Great Reset, Build Back Better. They understand socialism is a tough sell because of the brand negative equity in it. So this concept of neo-collectivism.
Yeah.
Walk me through. Give our audience loves nomenclature. What is neo-collectivism?
Well, it's communism, but what they're trying to spin it as is this way where focus on individuality and focus on the self is minimized because it's harmful and it's all greater good. We're all in this together. And so instead of accumulating capital and investing savings, you're in a pool and you're collectively reimagining workspaces and reimagining investments, which really just means you're basically ceding your right to property, into equity, into investment and in assets. And you're going to be put on this sort of score-based system instead, based on your output or based on your carbon output. And it really is just euphemistically restating the Communist Manifesto.
The probability that you think this happens, you would put it right now. You're a pretty good probability assessment guy. As we sit here today, what do you believe the probability is that the Treasury Department would be able to sell a central bank digital currency to the American people?
So there's a lot to unpack in that question because there's wholesale and retail CBDCs. But let's just say I think they're further off than a lot of some of the more alarmist prognostications say. We're not going to wake up before the election and there's a bank holiday and a CBDC, simply because I haven't seen enough of the technical groundwork done on a retail-facing CBDC. I think there's still some time. I think it's a lock that every G20 nation and almost every central bank in the world is driving toward a CBDC. That's 100%. Now, when do they start launching? There's a couple launched already and they're flops. So everything that's up and running is failing spectacularly. The e-Naira in Nigeria, the Venezuelans have tried 3 times. They've all failed. It's going to happen. The CBDCs are going to happen. Will they get to the point where it's this ubiquitous social credit score? It might get there in some localities for a while. I don't think it will sustain. And in the States, it's a particularly unique battle because of the unique structure of the United States, that there's individual states that are already creating legislation saying we're not going to have a retail CBDC here. So it's really going to get interesting in the U.S. Place like Canada, it's probably all but guaranteed.
Jeftovic will hope to help our Canadian brothers. If they don't want to wait around and read it retail at Zero Hedge, where do they go get the original content? Where do they go? Where do people find you?
Well, the original one was in the Bitcoin Capitalist. That's the premium letter from last month. But I excerpted that. I put it out on bombthrower.com. That's a free place you just get on the mailing list there. You'll get this. And I'm working on the new CBDC survival guide. That'll be my next ebook. And if you're on the Bomb Thrower mailing list, then you're going to get that when it drops.
Perfect. Mark Jeftovic. By the way, Twitter and Getter, anywhere else, we're on social media.
Getter, it's Bomb Thrower. Twitter, it's Stunt Pope. And I'm also on Noster. You're going to have to just catch it off the footer of my article on that.
Amazing content, Mark Jeftovic. Thank you very much. We're gonna work with you to save our Canadian brothers and sisters because we love Canada.
So do I. Thanks, Steve. Happy birthday, man.
Love them. Thanks, brother. Appreciate it. Roger Kimball, one of the strongest axes in the MAGA movement. Camp of the Saints. By the way, much before you coming on right now, Schumer's tweeting out that you can't hold up. Chuck Schumer's putting out, even as we speak, you can't hold up the $80 billion to Ukraine by putting on some much needed changes to the asylum system to stop the invasion of the country, because you can't put up policies that are never going to pass with a policy that you need immediately, which is putting more money into the Ukrainian money laundering system. Between Ireland, what's happening in Europe, the rest. Why is this book, Camp of the Saints? You wrote a magnificent piece on probably the most controversial book out there today. Tell our audience, what is Camp of the Saints? Why is it controversial? And why is it a perfect kind of indicator for what's happening on the world stage on this global invasion of nation states, sir?
Well, Steve, I guess it's your birthday. If that's correct, happy birthday. Camp of the Saints is a novel published by a chap called Jean Raspail back in the 1970s. I don't think it was meant to be as controversial as it has turned out to be. It is a dystopian novel about what happens when untrammeled immigration from the third world shows up on the shores of Europe, destroys Europe, and then goes across the Atlantic and destroys the United States. It destroys, in other words, civilization. But what makes this book so powerful is that Raspail understood that it was not just immigration. It was an explicit attack on everything that made the West the West. So we're talking about the rule of law, education, the family, the idea of a meritocratic, colorblind society. Everything that makes the West came under attack by this tsunami of barbaric, illegal immigration. And Raspail died, I think, about a decade ago, maybe a little more. His book was translated into English. The edition that you show there is the edition that I have. It is no longer in print. Many inquiries have been made with the French publisher, with the family of Raspail. They are not interested in seeing it republished. But I think, I haven't given up on the idea of finding a way of doing this. I think that this is not only a prescient book, but one that really does speak truth to power in a way that is probably unprecedented on the cultural landscape today, because it manages to tie the issue of immigration to so many other things, as, by the way, the 45th president of the United States did.
Right. One of the most powerful things, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's got some very rough parts to it. Some of the descriptions and I think they were coming from India. He was sitting on the beach one time at Cannes.
Yes, that's right. They were coming from India. That's right.
So
that's right.
It's not really North Africa or the Middle East or Latin America up to America. The most powerful part, and I've read the book a couple of times, the most powerful part to me was the response of the elites, not simply the destruction of culture, the response of the elites. And what's so amazing, it's almost like he ripped it from today's headlines. Talk to us about that for a second. I mean,
That's
what
right.
was so prescient
was
the elite's response is almost, it's so scary how it's played out 40 or 50 years later.
Exactly.
He nailed it.
Exactly. Well, if you go to, for example, the Wikipedia page about the novel, says this is a book that is saturated with colonialism, white supremacism, xenophobia, anti-immigration sentiment, and so on, all of which is a complete fabrication. The Wikipedia editors did not really, probably they didn't read the book, but then they go on to say that it's popular with the right wing and white supremacists in the United States, and it really they don't spell out the conclusion, but the idea is that this book should not be allowed to circulate, that it is a incendiary book. Well, in some sense, I suppose it is incendiary because it challenges the basic fundamental idea of the left these days. And certainly part of that idea is that there is something criminal, something hateful, something essentially wrong with whiteness. And once you buy into that, you have given up everything. And I think that a lot of people should read this book and ponder what it says. As you point out, the hordes of immigrants are coming in the novel, not from North Africa, not from Latin America, but from India. But the result is the same. It is to destabilize, to sabotage, to turn upside down and invert everything about the West. And it's from that point of view, it's a very prescient, far-seeing book, and I think it deserves to be more widely read than it is.
Roger, we have to bounce. You're one of the people that write these pieces that get me thinking all the time. Where do you go to get all your content? Your website, about your publishing, New Criterion, also the book group,
right,
and also your social media. Where do people go?
Yeah, well, I write columns for the Epoch Times more or less every week. I write a column for American Greatness more or less every week. I write frequently for the Spectator World, which is the United States version of the London Spectator. And I write for many other places, the Wall Street Journal, the Telegraph, the New Criterion. I do have a Twitter account and a Truth social account. It's just my name, so I'm not hard to find.
By the way, good luck on. It's a great endeavor to try to get the publishing rights for this. This book should be widely read. And like I said, it's got some very rough sections to it, some very disturbing sections, but it is quite powerful about our current condition. Very powerful. Roger, thank you so much for taking time away today, this afternoon, to join us. Appreciate it.
Great, thanks, Steve. Happy birthday
Camp
again.
of the Saints. Thanks, brother. Camp of the Saints, if you even mention it, they think, oh, this guy's a white supremacist. Far from it. You're trying to understand a process that was really called out by a French novelist who was kind of a screenwriter, too. Okay, Catharine O'Neill. You were one of the many stars, but really stood out on Friday's show. People wanted to know about, hey, this entrepreneur, she's been to Trump's campaign, she's been in the State Department, she's been in the White House, she's been back to the campaign. Of course, we blew out the sales on the beef, but I understand you may have some more that we can get before Christmas. Also, the subscription. Walk us through Merriweather Farms, your journey. We got a couple of minutes. I want to walk through where people can go. I want to immerse myself. The website's fantastic, so tell me all about it. You were a big star on Friday.
Thank you so much, Steve, and happy birthday, by the way. So Merriweather Farms, one of the questions that you asked me on Friday, I didn't really get to elaborate on, Steve, is what I've learned from going out as an entrepreneur. And really what I've learned that it's so important. We need to fight in the corporate world, not just in the political world. We really need to take the fight to the corporate world. And that's what I'm doing by building this vertically integrated company, hiring some of the best Americans in the country. So I just wanted to follow up on your question. And Merriweather Farms is a company that I started about 3 years ago, very carefully, and I've been very diligent and about who I involve in the company and what kind of people I involve, which is important. And we want to make sure that we're providing the best products to our consumers. by taking a very close look. That's why it's taken so long to get to where we are. And that's why it's taken a little bit longer to kind of keep up with the demand of your viewers, which has been so great, by the way, because we want to make sure, like I said, every ounce of steak that your viewers buy from us is perfectly crafted, fed, butchered, everything. So we control all aspects of that process, which makes us immune to market instabilities and other supply chain issues like we saw during COVID. So step by step, Steve, but we're getting there with the help of your viewers. So
walk through, going to the site. What if people want to look at
Sure.
either the sticks or to get into the subscription program or just order some beef for the Christmas holidays? Walk through where they go. We got about a minute. We got about 90 seconds. Just walk through what they're
Sure.
supposed to do today
So-
to learn more.
So you start off by going to meriwetherfarms.com. And today, because it's Cyber Monday, we're offering a special on our snack sticks, which are amazing. I actually eat them for lunch. They're very healthy, under 10 ingredients. Of course, no antibiotics, no hormones. And we're doing a buy one, get one half off deal on our snack sticks. So you have to go order the snack sticks and use the code CYBER to do that. We're still doing a 10% deal, Black Friday deal on our products. And then most importantly, because we have such a high demand, we're offering a 15% off deal if you sign up for a subscription. And that first box will arrive in January. So it's a great late Christmas present for people. If you have kids in college and you want to feed them good food, because God knows what they're eating in college. If you have a lot of athletes in your family, the sticks are great. So make sure to subscribe now, because we can't guarantee availability of our products because they just go so quickly. So if you subscribe now today, you'll get 15% off every month, and you'll have a guaranteed slot for our products.
Guaranteed. Catharine O'Neill, we got to bounce. We love Meriwether Farms. Love that you've gone out there and become a great entrepreneur. Thank you so much. It's absolutely incredible.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Steve. Happy birthday.
Thank you, ma'am. Appreciate it. She talked about supply chains. Go to Jace Medical, jacemedical.com. Check out, don't get caught up in the supply chain problem associated with the CCP on active pharmaceutical ingredients or generic drugs. Make sure you go check out today. See you back here tomorrow morning at 10 a.m.